Hey guys, how's it going? Preparing here. Now, the audio may be different in this video, and you're not going to see a video because the software that I use to capture these talent trees conflicts with my webcam software. So the sound may be a little bit different, like I mentioned, and I know you're not able to stare at a Kriparian wave around his hands and all that stuff in this video, but I think it's appropriate to instead of myself, put a picture of a similarly handsome gentleman, so you guys have something to look at. Zinedine Zidane. All right. So now that we're getting to the builds here, these are a few builds that myself and my friends have come up with in the last few days in order to prepare for the new leagues, specifically the Onslaught League, which is a turbo and, well, semi-turbo hardcore league that is coming out in a few hours, actually. So I'm going to go over some of these builds. I do want to stress that while these builds seem really, really good, and I'm almost 100% sure they're going to be some of the top builds out there, there's no certainty. We haven't played these exact builds. We haven't really played the game with the new rule set, the new damage changes, the new skill changes, all that stuff. So it is fairly experimental, and I just need you guys to understand that. So, you know, if you're going to use a large part of the build or the build as it is, it may not work out quite the way that you think or that I think. Now, also, all these builds are going to be in the description below, so if at any time you want to check out exactly what I'm talking about, you guys can do so. I'm going to talk about, I think it's maybe 7 or 8 builds. We'll see how long the video goes, and yeah, hopefully get some good ideas out there for you to work on your build as well. So this here is the Detonate Dead build. We had to change it up a little bit. Previously, I think you dipped into the nullification nodes by the Shadow, which are now called Void Bear. This is the nullification now. They pretty much renamed all the big passives. CI is still amazing because the last few nodes are still 8, 8, 8, and 20 multiplier, while a lot of the others have been nerfed to 6 from 8. Some others have not as well. You know, this is still 18, and some have been buffed. This used to be 6, it's now 10, and some have been unchanged like those. You know, pretty interesting stuff. You kind of have to look at all the nodes to really see the reasoning behind a lot of these. But the main thing to note is that with a Detonate Dead build, it's really important to keep in control of your character so you don't get surrounded, because, you know, one cast is all your life in terms of life leech and in terms of killing yourself sometimes. So you have to be really prepared to move your character around and know what you're doing. And as a result, you obviously need Volpack so you don't kill yourself. And because you can't get Eye of Chela because Onyx Amulets don't exist, you have to get Unwavering Stance with this build. So that's why it's a much harder build to complete than it was prior to the patch. So, you know, we start Templar. We get a lot of the same nodes that we did before. The main notable change here is that we get Elemental Dominion, which is a ridiculous buff to the build. You know, 20% more fire damage is immense. You get all the area nodes in the center, you get all the area nodes in the Templar, you get all the area nodes in the middle of the talent tree. You don't really need the mana regeneration, but hey, it kind of helps with Firetrap. That's kind of optional. Even these area nodes are kind of optional because, you know, this is a lot of points for this build. But in essence, if you're curious about how this build functions, you use Firetrap or something like that to kill a few monsters, or your party members kill a few monsters for you, and then you blow up the rest of the screen by combining Detonate Dead with a lot of fire damage items, a lot of fire damage passives, as well as linking it with increased area, chance to ignite, proliferate, and life leech. And if you have a 6th link, you know, you can get a little bit creative there. You don't use Conk Effect because you really need the larger radius, and with Conk Effect you'll probably kill yourself. So you got to get Elemental Adaptation to get 2% more resist. You don't need Inner Force. You don't need the mana. It's just really for discipline. You use Purity with this build. You use Discipline and Purity, and that's pretty much it. But this one, Purity and Clarity. But getting Inner Force is really a small buff, and with the amount of points that you really need to get to Unwavering Stance with, I felt it was not necessary. In addition to most normal Detonate Dead builds, this one gets the fire nodes by the Marauder, as well as Resolute Technique. Resolute Technique prevents yourself from critting the monsters on the Detonate, which will probably eventually save your character. So I feel that's very, very important. Overall, the Detonate Dead build is still a very, very strong one, and although the melee buffs are, in full effect, I do see a lot of people, holding true to some of the recent insane builds like this one. Another build that I've been working on is a Wander build. This is a CI Wander, and I'll show you guys how this works. It's a little bit more complicated, but if you're familiar with the previous Wander build, you'll kind of understand what's going on. So the main drawback to this build is that you don't really get that much crit. In fact, you don't really get that many power charges either. It's largely a support build, but it is a very good support build, and it works, and it's pretty tanky. Well, I think it works. So you start off as Witch, and you get the physical wand nodes, which have been buffed slightly, but enough that they are pretty decent. You go CI, and the reason you go CI is you use Blood Rage, which does chaos damage over time and gives you life leech. But because you're immune to chaos damage with chaos inoculation, you just get life leech for free, and when you kill a target, you get frenzy charges. And because you kill a lot of targets, because you're using Power Siphon, you're going to get a lot of frenzy charges. So you're going to max out on frenzy, and you're going to max out on power charges. And you're going to have a lot less crit, but it's not really that important, I don't feel. And because you're life leeching from the Blood Rage, instead of using life leech gem, you are going to use, as another red gem, Added Fire. And you're going to combine that with Hatred. It's going to be pretty hard to get a physical wand, but once you get a physical wand, you scale the physical from the wand into elemental by using the Added Fire and the Hatred, and you can throw in Wrath or something like that if you can. You get pretty typical CI nodes. You get some nullification there. You got to get Ghost Reaver to convert that life leech into ES leech, and most of the stuff here is pretty typical. What's a little less typical is something that you notice, reduced mana cost. So the typical Wander build these days is a build that goes Elemental and goes Eldritch Battery, and it works okay. It got nerfed pretty harshly over the last few patches, largely due to the fact that when Chain chains new projectiles, it doesn't re-roll the chance to crit. So instead of critting half the time through your chain projectiles, they're either all non-crit or all crit, which means you might kill yourself and you're going to do no damage, no damage, no damage, and then kill everything when they crit. So it's very inconsistent with that. That's why I feel that this build may work a little bit better. The reason you need all these mana reduction nodes is because without Eldritch Battery, you cannot get enough mana regen to spam the cast. So this build gets all the mana all the mana reduction nodes in the Templar, all the ones between the Marauder and the Templar, all the ones in the Duelist, and all the ones below the Duelist here. And as a result, you have 64% reduced mana cost of skills, bringing down your Power Siphon cost to like 40 or 50, next to nothing. And with this, you'll be able to spam Chain GMP Power Siphon linked with Added Fire and Greater Projectiles. So pretty cool stuff. You do get Iron Reflex, you do get Unwavering Stance, because as I mentioned, any CI build that's going to try to be a little bit tanky is going to require Unwavering Stance, because otherwise you're just going to be chain stun. So it is a fairly interesting build. Iron Grip helps a little bit with physical damage, but it is mostly support. This is not a build that you can quickly clear maps with by yourself. But, those of you that like wanding, this is pretty much the, in my opinion, the next gen variation of it. So maybe you guys want to check that out. The next build that I have here is the one that I plan to do to start. I'm planning on doing a Templar full support build, and I'm going to evolve that into the Discharge build, which I'll show you later on in this video. So with this build, it's pretty simple. You get all the area nodes, you get a lot of elemental nodes, and you get Inner Force, you get Eldritch Battery, you get Dual Curse, and with an item you'll go Triple Curse, and you go Iron Reflex. You don't need Unwavering Stance because you're life-based, so you're not going to really be stunned that much, especially due to your Insane Armor. You're going to have Insane Armor because you got every single body and soul node. This build also gets Dual Totem, but this is something that I'm still kind of up in the air about. I'm not sure if that's really the best way to go. So let me explain how this build works. Oh, and you get Elemental Equilibrium as well. So the build works as follows. You use Shockwave Totem, and you use it to trigger Elemental Equilibrium. You're not really using it for damage, even though it does some kind of damage. You have to level it up, because leveling up increases the life that the totem has, which is important. You're using Hatred, and because you're using Hatred, it buffs the damage of the totem, as well as turning it to cold damage, allowing you to go against cold with Elemental Equilibrium. The reason this is important is because if you're running a group which has a lot of cold users, you can drop Hatred and use other things like perhaps added fire to go against fire, or added lightning to go against lightning. So it's a very flexible build that takes advantage of Elemental Equilibrium. As I mentioned, because of Eldritch Battery, because of Inner Force, because of Iron Reflex, you're going to have a ridiculous amount of armor. You're going to have a ridiculous amount of regen because of the ES nodes, converting your ES into a lot of mana. And as a result, you're going to be able to run Arctic Armor. So this build is insanely tanky. You're literally going to take 0 damage from almost any physical hit out there. Doing so will allow you to do curses, and because you're not really taking any damage, you don't really need Life Leech. And because you don't really need Life Leech, you can use stuff like traps. And I think Firetrap is really appropriate. Firetrap does insane damage, especially when put in a plus to skills item, like a wand which has +2 fire skills. You'd use Firetrap, Conk Effect, and that will result in maybe like 10k damage. And because I'm getting all the area nodes complement the Firetrap, they complement the curses, and they complement the Shockwave totem. So everything that the character does is complemented by the area nodes. And I think this build will be very, very good. It's pretty much a superior version of the zombie Triple Curse Elemental Equilibrium build. It is less on the support side because Firetrap will murder pretty much anything on the screen. So the soloing capability is a little bit better. But, I'm still up in the air to see in the very high level maps how much damage the monsters actually deal. Because if the monsters deal too much damage, this build is lacking life support. Because, it doesn't have that much life. But these days, I don't really know what enough life is. I haven't done the high level maps. I haven't done them with a lot of armor. So this is fairly experimental on the defensive side of things. But we'll see, and I'll keep you updated, of course. This build, I'm going to try to take this into the Discharge build. I guess I'll show you guys that build now. So the Discharge build, I think, is the most overpowered build in the game. However, you need roughly level 90, and you need a series of insanely valuable uniques. As a result, the build is pretty much unusable up until that point. I know a lot of you guys were curious about what I was doing yesterday, and I might upload some footage of that in the future, so I want to show you guys exactly what I'm talking about. So the Discharge build uses Discharge, Self-Cast, and stacks Crit Multiplier and uses Critical Weakness. We've done the math, and we don't think you'll one-shot yourself ever with this build. You have to use Vol's Protector, which gives you power charge for any enemy that you hit with a crit, and because Discharge hits pretty much the whole screen, every target you crit with Discharge will give you a power charge, thus allowing you to discharge again. There's a new amulet out there that when you use or a power charge expires, you gain an endurance charge, and as a result, with that amulet, you'll be able to do Discharge, back to back. Even if the first doesn't crit, you'll still have the second. Because the build is CI, it also uses Blood Rage. So when you kill an enemy, you get a Frenzy Charge. When you crit an enemy, you get a Power Charge. When you use a Power Charge or a Power Charge expire, you get an Endurance Charge. So if you one-shot an enemy with a crit, you'll get maximum of all charges every single cast. And you should be able to do crits averaging about 150,000 damage, which should one-shot every single monster in the game in a 6-player group, except maybe a few bosses. The reason this build is very hard to do is because you need enough energy shield using Vol's Protector. So as a result, you need the Mind Over Matter, which used to be Body and Soul. You need the other Body and Soul. You need Nullification. You basically need a crap load of ES. You need a lot of good gear. You need a 5-linked minimum Vol's Protector. Using Discharge, you're not using Conk Effect. With that, you'll kill yourself, and it reduces the radius, which is not good. So you use Discharge, increased radius. You gotta have the Life Leech, and Crit Strikes, crit damage. The 6th link is optional. You can use Item Rarity for all that matters, or you can use like Culling Strike, whatever. The problem with using all of those, and on top of that, you're going to need like Divinarius, you're going to need the boots, Rainbow Stride, you're going to need insane ES gear and all the other pieces, you're going to need an insane shield. Outside of the insane gear requirements, it's still going to be very difficult to play, largely because it's pretty tricky to not kill yourself. You have to know what to expect. And on top of that, you have to micromanage your mana. You have to use Purity with this build or else you'll kill yourself. And as you've noticed, the only mana regen node that this build has is a 40 mana regen node. And because you're using Dream Fragments to Rain, which increases your mana, combined with Vol's Protector, the sum of that is you're going to have 30% reduced mana. So you're going to have a mana pool of about 500, maybe 600. You're going to have to use Purity with that, like I mentioned, and you're going to have to use Discipline to make up for the fact that you're using a crappy ES chest. So you're going to have maybe 200-300 mana left over with 0 mana regen. And the way this build functions is, because you one-shot the whole screen, you'll get a lot of potion charges, and with that, you'll have to use Seething Mana Potions. Yes, guys, this is the first time in history that anyone's actually put these to use. This is pretty much the most worthless potion in the game, but for this build, it's required. You're going to need to instantly regen your mana from killing monsters. So it's a pretty crazy build. But it is something I have to aspire to, it is something I have to level to, it is something that I have to get enough items to do, and this is probably going to be something like 1 to 2 months down the line. You guys will see some of the most, epic slaying of monsters in Path of Exiles ever, if I manage to get to this point alive. So you guys can look forward to that. A few other builds I want to quickly go over is the Spark build. The Spark build is largely unchanged, but because you cannot rely on getting heavily linked Chevron's wrappings and going low life right away, you have to have a more conventional build, and that's what I feel that we came up with. It's a pretty typical build, but Spark, although it was nerfed, really was not nerfed very much. It's still one of the most powerful group-based builds, especially early on, because of the shock stacking, because of the insane burst damage. So you guys can check that out. A few other pretty interesting builds is the Claw build. This is a Duelist CI Cyclone Claw build. Duelist is a little bit more efficient than Shadow for this build, but Shadow is also an option. You have to get Unwavering Stance because you're CI. We got Iron Reflex, so your armor should be very, very good. If you're doing Cyclone, you have to get Master of the Arena for the increased melee range. That's pretty much crucial. You get Vol Pact because you're going to have a ridiculous amount of Leech with this build. You have a ridiculous amount of ES with this build as well. Should be very tanky. But the reason it's Claw and not anything else is largely because of the passives, which are pretty strong up there and are really strong over here. The Life Leech Claw passes are buffed to 4% Life Leech each. As a result, you're going to have 12% Life Leech from that tree. You're going to have 10% Life Leech from a quality Blood Rage, and you're going to have 8% Life Leech from a Claw. So without really trying, you're going to have 30% Life Leech with Vol Pact with a really high ES pool. You'll pretty much be unkillable with this build, and we think the damage will be sufficient enough to worth bringing into a group. So that's it there. It's pretty cool stuff. Check it out. This resembles a lot of the CI melee builds, so it should act as a pretty good framework for a lot of similar builds. This is a fairly experimental build, but I thought you guys would enjoy seeing some information about it. This is a Elemental Hit Dual Totem Crit Multiplier build. We started Templar, got some Elemental nodes, got to get the Dual Totems, you have to be in this area anyway. Got Inner Force, and we got all these power charges because we think while you're Dual Totem, the character should be using Frenzy with power charge on crit, and you have the crit. Even though you do no damage, it does trigger crits and it does proc those charges. So you have all the frenzy charges and you have all the power charges, and you're critting an insane amount because you're a life-based build. You don't need Unwavering Stance, as I mentioned, and because you're totem-based damage, you don't need Vol Pact to compensate for stacking critical multiplier. The totems themselves, in this case, would use Elemental Hit with either LMP or GMP, I'm not sure, but with Pierce, combined with Piercing Shots, should do a full pierce of the spray of the Elemental Hit, And on top of that, you want to have critical multiplier to allow you to do some pretty crazy damage. So we think the build will work pretty well, but it's fairly unique. We haven't seen anything like it in the past. So we want to share with you guys the idea. And the last build is one that a few people out of our group are trying. This is a split arrow frenzy build. It is a bow crit build with Volpact and CI. As I mentioned, most CI builds require unwavering stance, but this build, being a bow build, we felt it didn't absolutely need it. So as a result, we skipped out on that, but we got Iron Reflex anyway, so when you take damage, especially from Reflect, you don't die that fast. You get frenzy charges from using Blood Rage because you're CI, and you get frenzy charges from your single target, which is going to be Frenzy. But primarily you're going to be using Split Arrow with Pierce, similarly to the Elemental Hit. You want to use Pierce, and you want to use Piercing Shots, just to like spray, cone your damage. In addition to that, the build is fairly straightforward. You get a lot of the Shadow crit nodes, you get a lot of the Ranger crit nodes, you get a lot of the Bow crit nodes beside the Ranger. And the main difficulty will be finding a bow appropriately, complemented with the build. It has enough ES to be fairly tanky, but obviously you want to sit in the back for most of your time there. And you got to get Volpact, as I mentioned. And because it's on the way, we thought Conduit would be pretty cool because you could feed frenzy charges to the group. And largely because probably a lot of people are going to experiment with a lot of melee builds, and a lot of melee builds involve using Flicker Strike. So Flicker Strike is going to consume a lot of those charges. It's pretty much a fairly high damage, fairly unique, and semi-support build. So pretty cool stuff there. Anyway, guys, hope you guys enjoyed my review of some of these builds. Again, all of them are in the description below if you want to check them out. Again, we make these builds because we think they're the best, but in the end, it's your character that you're playing. So really, my best advice is that you perhaps use some of this stuff for ideas towards your own builds, or just copy it straight out if you really want. If you're really somewhat new to the game, some of these builds are gonna set up a really good framework for you to understand the concepts behind builds and behind what actually goes on when you're doing endgame in Path of Exile. So hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you guys learned something, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Sudan out.